Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, how's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Scott McKay. You can find me on TikTok, on YouTube, on True Social, and on X at Scott McKay, and on Instagram at Real Scott McKay. And the website, as always, is mountaintoppodcast.com. And gentlemen, if you haven't already joined the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook, we're looking for you there. Join it. It's not your typical men's group where everybody's complaining about their relationships and everybody's just telling guys they've never met before to divorce their wife and kick them to the curb because a guy made a post on Facebook. No, we don't do anything like that. I'm not a self-absorbed guy who comes on and, basically bans guys and tells them they're wrong every time they post something. Now, we don't do that. We have lots of fun. We admire women. We enjoy women. We get to be better men in the truest sense of the word, all at the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. With me today is a new friend of mine. You're going to adore her. She's very wise. She's very wonderful. She comes from Fullerton, California, which is in the OC out there in California. And check this out, guys. Judith Kaluzny is a divorce lawyer and mediator. She's retired these days. And she is on a mission to not just reform family law, but to overthrow it. I know that's going to be music to a lot of your guys' ears after what some of you have been through. And with that in mind, I really, really am looking forward to everything she's going to bring to the table today. From California, Judith Kaluzny, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me explain why I say overthrow instead of reform.
Please, jump right into it.
In my research, I've got a stack of books, I don't know how many feet high, of people that wrote about divorce reform. I mean, books back to 1975. And all these books have as many as 35 pages of listing their sources, their footnotes. These books are written by academics. And academics really don't accomplish changes that are effective. So,
ouch. Boy, you don't pull any punches, do you? You go right after them.
We have to start with a whole different premise. See, all the reforms that I've encountered start with a court process. And when you talk about court, that sets up a win-lose sort of mindset. That sets up a mindset of proving you're right and the other side is wrong. Even if they mean to guide you into a mediation, but still that you have to go to a courthouse to file. Scott, I've been thinking about this for 30 years. And let me tell you how I started thinking about this. Back in the day, I was contacted by a deputy sheriff in regard to establishing a parental relationship. He had had a child out of wedlock, and the child was about 4 years old, but he was now married and had his own child. But the grandmother of this child out of wedlock called him up and said, George, your son is living in a drug house, and if you don't go get him, I will. And so he did go get his son, and he came to me to establish the legal parental relationship. And in that process, we also met with the mother and arranged supervised visits with the son while my guy got custody of the child. So 2 months later, this woman's mother hired a lawyer for her daughter, and they went to court claiming that now that I've had more time with my son, 2 months worth, I want custody. Well, the judge appointed a psychologist to do a study. The psychologist was very offensive. My guy says his wife almost divorced him over the stress. The report, the psychologist took, was it 3 or 5 months, wrote a 53-page report, cost $5,000. This was 30 years ago. And on top of that, my guy was a tall Chinese man from Vietnam. And part of the psychology report included an MMPI test. Well, I knew you do not use MMPI on a person with a Confucian cultural background. So I quickly hired another psychologist to testify against this guy. And we go to court, and mom's lawyer puts the psychologist on the stand. The 53-page report is given to the judge, and the lawyer starts to question. The judge interrupts, and he starts talking directly to the parents. And the mom's lawyer kept interrupting until the judge almost threw her out of court. Anyway, so the judge did not listen to the psychologist. The judge did not read the 53-page report. The judge did not look at my wonderful brief. And he talked to the parents for 20 minutes and had an agreement between them. And that was it. Wow. I drove back to my office just stunned. It was kind of like if anybody saw the bridge on the River Kwai. And I thought, why didn't we do this in the first place? Why the 5 months and the $5,000 in this?
I'm laughing with you, not at you, and I don't know why I'm laughing. Probably laughing to keep from crying.
Yeah, and so that's when I started my thinking. Why not do this differently? Let's be logical.
It's very interesting you would say that. First of all, you said that you have academic papers, probably peer-reviewed studies and so forth, dating back to 1975. And 50 years later, here we are, right?
Right.
What's improved? Exactly. I'll tell you, when I went through my divorce, I feel very strongly that the lady I hired prolonged the process a lot longer than it had to be. I've said this on this show before, but you and I are just getting to know each other, so I'll share it again here briefly. My ex was crazy, and she came to court unprepared. She didn't have a lawyer. She hadn't even filed an answer yet. And the judge was ready to rule 100% in my favor, give me custody of my daughter and everything. And my lawyer said, wait, stop. I went 5 minutes with my client, and we went out and convened. And my lawyer had me, out of the goodness of my heart, grant my soon-to-be ex another 2 weeks to get her act together, saying that would cause the judge to look favorably on our case. And when I said, but it's over, we can walk now, she goes, no, that's not how it works. And now I realize you're already chopping at the bit, right? Go for
it. Well, let me tell you the difference between mediation and litigated divorce. When I learned about mediation, I was invited by a sociologist who took mediation training to be her attorney consultant. And pretty soon I just started setting in the whole sessions. And then I took my own mediation training and I quit going to court. 43 years as a lawyer, and the second half of it was no court. I did mediated divorces in my office. Anyway, so one couple came to me in February, and they had one house and 2 pensions, 3 kids, and spousal support for a stay-at-home dad. Before the end of April, they were single again, and their judgment filed with the court and signed by a judge. February, March, April. And another time, a man who lived in the apartments across the street from my office saw my mediation sign, came over. He wanted to mediate the rest of his divorce. His wife had hired who I said must have been a nice lawyer, because the first thing that lawyer did was sit them down and do a parenting plan. They had 2 kids, but he wanted to finish the rest of his divorce through mediation. And I said, I can't contact your wife because she's got a lawyer. But I wrote for him an interim agreement as to how to finish the divorce, including hiring a certified divorce financial expert and a neutral way as how to choose a financial expert. And he's offering $10,000 a month in support, which was half of his income. But they had a lot of investments, and they had property, real estate. Apparently, wife was offended by this proposal because she fired her nice lawyer and hired the number 1 shark, Orange County. And 4 years and $429,000 in attorney's fees and 5 court appearances and 2 days in negotiating in respective lawyers' offices. The couple went to a coffee shop one evening and spent all night and wrote their own agreement.
Isn't that something? After 3.5 years of the would-be financial support amount going to the lawyers.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You know, where I was going to go from there with the story I was telling is that if you fast forward about a decade and a half, we had another problem with one of our exes. And of course, Emily and I are married by then. And the lawyer said, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but here in the state of Texas, at least, judges will agree on whatever the two of you agree on.
Yes.
As long as it's within the confines of the law. I mean, they're not going to agree that you get to murder the other person or something like that. But any reasonable agreement.
Yes.
Right, exactly. And the lawyers can argue it out, but what do the two of you want? What is going to be reasonable to the two of you? Almost exactly like what they're attempting to do right now with Ukraine and Russia on a grand global scale. Yet the people who want things only their own way and think that somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose don't like that mediation approach at all. I mean, you get that even in other venues and other situations outside of divorce. And yes, even on a global scale. I mean, if Russia doesn't pay and lose and leave this whole aggression with their tail between the legs thoroughly defeated, then Donald Trump is some sort of Putin sympathizer, when really he said over and over, I just would really like to watch people stop dying here. And that's the essence of mediation is, okay, what's going to be agreeable to both sides to stop this? And until we come up with something, really, we're just going to keep arguing. And the price to pay there, I mean, in a divorce situation, in a family dissolution situation, it's not necessarily with the lives of soldiers and blood on the battlefield, but it can feel that way sometimes, can it?
Yeah. Yeah. My proposal was to start with a triage. First of all, have an office or a department that's called family services. And you go to a family services department and they'll do an intake, a triage. And the reality is at least 3.8% of people in divorce are high conflict. And high conflict people are not appropriate for mediation. And so the high conflict people must be dealt with in a more structured manner. But I think that the other people should have a guided divorce. And the services that they need, some people, if they have a lot of assets and they need forensic accountants or other appraisers, those should be public employees that are accountable to their work, but then paid for by the people that need the services. Now, there was one case that a forensic accountant told me about that he represented the wife. His fees were $100,000. He said, but husband's accountant did most of the work, and his fees were $300,000. And that divorce was held every Friday, the trial, every Friday for 5 years in Long Beach. And we're paying for that. We're paying for the judges and the bailiffs and the clerks, and the people are playing games with it all.
It's hard to see how that benefits the people who are the claimants.
Well, and then they pay the same filing fee that a divorce that takes 1 year. So they're using up 5 times or at least the amount of court time, and they're paying the same amount of money.
Just to argue out something that's probably going to end up the same way in the end that it would have after 6 months or a year, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's just insane. You mentioned 3+% of people, I don't remember the exact figure you gave, are just not going to respond well to mediation. They're high conflict people. Yes. Briefly, tell us how you spot one of those people so you know you're dealing with them up front. I mean, I would think it's obvious, but just clarify that.
I'm not an expert in that, Scott. Couldn't tell you. I'll give you a reference is that the number one expert in high conflict people is Bill Eddy, who has a High Conflict Institute. And he writes books for judges and people on dealing with high conflict people. For instance, one book he has is 5 types of people who can ruin your life.
Well, I tell you what, I think I might be a little bit more of an expert on that than people might think. Yeah, if someone is just saying no to everything, or they've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or some kind of psychosis, or even the most simplest suggestion like, hey, let's go out for coffee is just met with aggression. If they have a history of being provoked to physical or even verbal violence without much provocation at all, I would think those would fall under that category.
Oh, yeah, domestic violence. But there's another book that I bought online, and it's got the most god-awful cover. The name is Screw the Bitch. And it's how to weaponize the court system.
Oh, I thought maybe it was an animal husbandry book for dog lovers.
Yeah, no.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's all about how to screw the woman using the court system.
Oh boy, I bet the men going their own way love that book.
Yeah, but right now I paid for it because I wanted it in my library as an illustration, but it cost me $60 online.
Wow. Yeah, so someone's getting good money for that book. It's a popular thing.
Yeah.
I have two ways I want to go with this conversation. And the first one is what you just brought up is amazingly important to every guy listening, because I think a lot of guys are really under the impression, Judith, that anytime a man enters into the family law system, he's the one who's going to get screwed. He's going to be the bitch, right? And the women always find favor with the lawyers. They get full custody. They get most of the man's wealth, and he gets to be stuck with the house payments until the house sells. And more men who are divorced end up committing suicide. And it's just poor me, a victimhood fest for men who have to go through divorce. And I know your opinion's a little different on that, even though you're in California. And I'd love to hear that. And I think that's the first place we ought to go next, because it seems like it's what comes next here. So talk about the reality of how men fear in the family law system.
Well, it is especially notable that in cases of domestic violence, that there's an organization that was founded by a lawyer that teaches at Berkeley, the Family Violence Appellate Project. And the basis of their formation was that in domestic abuse cases, 54% of the time, men get custody of the children.
If they were the abuser.
Yes. And I know a woman who was a police officer and is now an internationally known custody expert. She told me she thinks it's closer to 80% of the time.
Why is that? What goes on?
Well, the man is so cool that he shows up in court, totally together, and he's got the control of the money. By this time, the woman is worn down and distraught and perhaps less articulate because she's just in a panic over her life.
And afraid of the guy.
And getting out of everything. And
if I say something bad about this guy in court under oath, he may come kill me 2 hours later.
Wait, I did tell you this, is that educating judges and psychologists, I say, probably doesn't help unless they're initially prone to reasonableness in the first place. There was a judge that wanted to pay more attention to domestic violence. He was in charge of the family law department. And he said, you cannot be a referral for a custody investigation as a psychologist unless you take this 12-hour domestic violence training. And I had a client who was a tall, nice-looking woman, and she was a teacher, and her husband was tall and good-looking, and he was a lawyer, and they had 2 kids. But she said the abuse started on their honeymoon in Hawaii.
Wow.
But she lasted 4 years with him. So there was a judge ordered a psychological evaluation. So I called the psychologist's office. And I just wanted to be sure that they were in the separate room because she was very concerned. And that's when there is abuse, you need to have people in separate rooms if you're going to mediate or try to mediate anything. And the receptionist that answered the phone was offended that I should tell them how to do their business. And my client came back, and sure enough, the psychologist had her sitting right next to him. And she said to me, I couldn't say what I wanted to say because I was afraid he'd get even with me later.
Yep. You betcha. Right. And then they're under oath in court. And, as you know, and I know, people who are clinically psychotic or even narcissistic can pass polygraph tests. Lying.
Then there was
they feel like they're doing the right thing in their own mind.
Oh, yeah. Because there was another woman that came to me. I knew her mother when I was lawyering. So she came to me just to talk, to see what she could glean. And her husband started the divorce by filing, and they separated. And she had the little girl, 11-year-old with her, 9-year-old. And he filed a report with the DA or the police department that she had absconded with their child stealing. So she was arrested, and this whole thing was finally cleared, but she's tainted now. It even went through child services. Now, Dad has custody. He's disobeying the visitation orders, and she hasn't seen her daughter for 11 months.
Well, lest I come off as anti-man, which is the last thing I want to do on a podcast for men when I'm trying to help guys be better men, I want to be the first one to clarify here. This can go both ways. You know, men can do this stuff to women and vice versa. It's not gender specific, which is our whole point here, right?
Yeah, except that the woman's book I have on how to deal with divorce is how to conciliate, how to be reasonable, as opposed to screw the bitch.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we could all use better terms, not such inflammatory terms, perhaps not to sell as many books, but to be more reasonable and have a more logical, helpful discussion on the whole matter for sure. But my own purely anecdotal evidence is that having dated a lot of single moms when I was a single dad, and for all you guys out there who are kind of anti the concept of dating single moms, remember when I was single, I had custody of my little 5-year-old daughter. So I was a single dad. So dating single moms, well, you know, Judith, I got really good at meeting women who had 5-year-old daughters like I did. You know, so we could perpetrate a play date when it was actually a date for mom and dad. But I was dating woman after woman who was scrambling, Judith. I mean, they had been divorced and they got the kids, and now they had to get a job and feed the kids. And the husbands, if they had child support, it wasn't much, and they were probably not paying it and getting away with it. This was all here in Texas, okay?
Uh-huh.
But I only met maybe 2 women who were thriving as single moms, and in both cases, it was not because of daddy's money. Their baby daddy's money, I should clarify. Never did I ever see a situation where a woman just took a guy for everything he had and was living large in the company of her kids, and dad was somewhere out there suffering. I never saw it. It didn't really happen in my own marriage. I mean, yes, my crazy ex got half the income. She got custody of our daughter until she went nuts and got put away, and then I got full custody. But in the end, I think I came out better than she did. But a lot of guys, especially if they want to find reasons to be angry at women in general, will cite the family law process as being patently unfair to men. And, you know, I'll talk to guys and I'll hear just about everything. I'll hear, okay, well, my crazy ex hired a lawyer and now she's getting the most out of me and I'm getting the short end of the stick. But I'll also hear from guys who say, well, you know what? Finally, in many cases, they got mediation and this is behind me, and now I have the means and the ability to move on. And Scott helped me go out there and date again and meet some women, and their dating budgets are massive and they're living pretty well. So, I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion that a guy is going to do better or a woman's going to do better once the dust clears from this divorce. But what I think you'll agree with me on, and I know this as a fact because you've already talked about it and even written a book on it, is that who usually wins here is the legal system, the lawyers.
Yes. I have a cartoon that said that his lawyer got the condominium and the powerboat, and my lawyer got the condo and something else.
Exactly.
But I think, you know, with this, I think it's the result of Hollywood movies.
Well, also lawyers pitting couples against each other for personal profit.
Oh my God, yes. I had a woman that I met at some organization, young woman, and she and her husband were married for 2 years, and a starter marriage, let's call it. And they had a prenuptial agreement, and their divorce took 4 years. And later on, they met at a party, you know, sometime later, and they started talking, and they found out that all the nasty things that fed the divorce process that were allegedly said by one to about the other were made up by the lawyers. They never said those things.
That's horrible.
That's practically incredible.
Absolutely so. And unethical. I mean,
oh, really?
Attorneys should get disbarred for that sort of activity.
Right.
Yeah, you know, I'm looking back at my own divorce, And the interesting thing in retrospect is my lawyer rolled her eyes and groaned out loud when she found out who my ex had hired as a lawyer.
Uh-huh.
Oh, he's terrible. I can't work with him. And as it turned out, they couldn't do this little dance together that we're talking about very well because he was too stupid and incompetent to do it. So she couldn't call him up and formulate this plan on how to approach our divorce together from his legal perspective and her legal perspective combined. And looking back, that's most likely what she meant when she rolled her eyes and said, oh, he's incompetent. Because if he's incompetent at representing my now ex-wife, then it should have been a slam dunk for her and she should have been happy about it.
Yeah.
She was upset she couldn't work with them in exactly the devious ways we're talking about.
Oh, two things. One is one client that came to me said she had gone to a lawyer and sat down and says, we just want to be friends when we're finished. And the lawyer said to her, when we're finished with this, you won't be friends. And
At least he was honest.
Yeah, she ran out of the room. And in other cases, especially young women lawyers were so hostile that I would not talk to them on the phone because they would twist whatever had been said. I would deal with them only in writing.
Maybe the worst legal advice I've ever had from a friend, and it's not legal advice, it was advice on how to hire a lawyer, was get a female lawyer because she'll tear up your ex.
The older ones that I knew were fine. They were reasonable and they knew the process. But the new young ones, and one older lawyer says, I think they're just behaving like they think the men are.
That's probably true. I said there were several things I wanted to ask you about. The second one is a while back, you dropped this phrase parenting plan, which presumably is as opposed to a custody battle.
Yes.
That seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And this is the first time I've ever heard of such a thing. So elaborate on that idea.
Oh, Texas has parenting plan. Oh, no, Texas calls it guardianship, but they do not say custody, the Texas law. Wyoming cowboys do parenting plans. Tiger Woods in Florida did a parenting plan. California does custody.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, think of the words. I won custody. I lost custody. I was awarded custody.
Yeah, like the best interest of the child is a proxy war. It's like a battle for territory even.
Well, and in 1989, you think California's a progressive state, there was a psychologist who was expert in custody and also taught at Berkeley Law School. He wrote a new law changing the language to something like parenting plan, and the state assembly passed that, and the state senate rejected it. But there are 17 states that have changed their family statutes to talk about parenting plan or parental responsibility. And Utah has gone one step even further that I think is amazing. As of last September 2024, in the state of Utah, if you have children, you cannot file for a divorce until you have a written parenting plan.
That is amazing. So in other words, it's a more compassionate and responsible approach to the children involved, because after all, the children aren't the ones getting a divorce. The children aren't the ones with the problem.
Right. And the state offers a lot of forms and advice online to help you with a parenting plan. And then if that's not enough, they offer you mediation to help you with a parenting plan. And if all else fails, the judge will write a parenting plan for you.
Oh, you probably wouldn't want that. You want your own autonomy if you can swing it, right?
Yes. In Colorado, I was invited to address their standing committee on family issues. And I did a little research on Colorado, and they're a parenting plan state. And I looked at the websites of their lawyers that do family law, several lawyers that do family law. And every one of them, right up front, advertised custody and visitation litigation. And I told this to this committee. You call it parenting plans, but the lawyers are advertising litigation for custody. And so I thought, well, now Utah has avoided that by saying you can't do a divorce without a parenting plan first.
Wow. I would imagine there's some Latter-day Saints influence on that legislation, isn't there?
I haven't researched that part of it, but
Then again, the Mormons don't really believe in divorce much at all.
They just believe in extra wives.
Well, there you go. More importantly, I have another question for you.
Yes.
This is actually what piqued my interest in having you on the show at all, Judith. But
yes,
now you've come and been so wonderful and so charming, and you have so much wonderful wisdom on the whole ideas, on the whole concept of family law. I'm so glad you showed up, because this has been just a content-rich experience, and you've been wonderful so far. But what indeed caught my eye was the idea of a post-nuptial agreement. I'd never heard of such a thing, but it's something that you advocate and talk about a lot. So what's going on there? What's up with that?
Well, first of all, people maybe don't understand that marriage is a contract. It is a contract. And if you don't write
whether we like it or not.
And the state has a default contract unless you write your own. And the essence of a contract is a mutual understanding. And to be enforceable, you need it in writing and signed and dated, signed by both parties.
Well, hold on a second. I don't like interrupting my guest, but I want to clarify something here, because I think it's important for the guys who are listening, most of us being laymen. We recite vows to each other at a spiritual level and consider that just de facto standard de rigueur stuff for having a marriage ceremony.
Yes.
But it is also a legally binding institution.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is my argument for gay marriage. I mean, whether you're Christian, gay, or straight, if it's going to be something that has legal ramifications, in other words, we can file jointly as a couple for tax purposes in tax season or whatever, even back before it was popular, I always thought that gay couples should have the same rights and privileges thereof, without perhaps having the spiritual aspect of being in a conservative Christian church even. But that aside, we don't give a second thought about the contract before God, assuming that's how we are and that's what our faith lends us to believe is necessary and right and good and proper in that circumstance. But it is always also a legally binding contract. I mean, you can get married at the justice of peace, for goodness sake. So there's a lot of bad press, a lot of bad juju given to the idea of needing a prenuptial agreement, like we don't trust each other. But it is also, like you said, and I'm just now realizing this based on how you positioned it, that it's foolish to go into any legally binding relationship or arrangement of any kind without a contract.
Yes. For example, in California, the state mandated contract is community property, which is all assets acquired through work, your own efforts after marriage. And there was a movie with George Clooney and what's her name, Zeta Jones, where the morning after the wedding night, now everything you own is mine too.
Oh, I remember that movie. I can't remember the name of it either, but it was like a swindle she ran, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't true, because everything you own remains your separate property unless you do something to in the state of California anyway.
But it made for an interesting plot complication.
Exactly.
Yes.
In any case, so a contract in California, it's community property and it's fiduciary relationship. You owe to your spouse the highest good faith and fair dealing. And the courts these days in California are taking that obligation very seriously.
Well, either you write your own or the court's going to write it for you after the fact.
Yeah. And in California, there was one example that a couple that were separated, but the woman used community money to buy a lottery ticket, and she won the lottery, and she didn't tell her husband, soon to be ex. He wasn't ex yet. Anyway, he found out later, and he took her to court, and the judge punished her not by just dividing that winnings, but gave the whole thing to husband.
Wow.
That's the consequences of a breach of fiduciary relationship.
There's a movie about that too. With Nick Cage and Rosie Perez called It Could Happen to You. Where he tries to give the waitress half of his lottery ticket if he wins. And then Rosie Perez is like the evil soon-to-be ex who divorces him over it and wants the whole lottery ticket. That's what the whole movie's about.
Oh, they know this story.
Yeah, it's an old movie. It's probably a 25-year-old movie now, but that is the plot of it. Exactly. Fascinating. So what is a post-nuptial agreement then?
So that's you're changing your property relationships during marriage. One example in real life is that I had a woman come to me for divorce, and she had established her own business, and it was a thriving business. But 11 years before, when she was starting it, she had consulted with a lawyer and said, I want this business to be my separate property. And he said, oh, no, it has to be community property. Not true. She and husband could have written an agreement to say in writing that this would be her separate property. And so if like during the marriage, one spouse wants to go back to school or get some kind of education and it's going to cost money, well, maybe you can write a post-nup to agree how that's going to be paid for. Or if they ever split up, that the community will be compensated for what they spent on her or his books or tuition or whatever. Any kind of thing. Or like starting a business during marriage. Or perhaps at some point, well, let's say you inherit a house and you both want to live there and you want the house to remain your separate property, but the house has a mortgage on it. Well, during marriage, your earnings are community property. So if you pay the mortgage with community property money, that asset is going to have a community interest. So you could write an agreement to say all payments on here, or you establish separate bank accounts and you deposit your wages in separate accounts, and you have an agreement that these accounts are separate property. And then you pay the mortgage out of a separate money.
So you can come up with these agreements long after you're married just because your circumstances have changed.
Yes.
And a judge will agree to it because you've agreed to it.
Oh, well, yeah, the judge doesn't have any choice.
Well, yeah, exactly. Why not?
Well, there are some things in a prenup that would not pass muster in a court of law.
Such as what?
That would be something that impairs the ability of the court to make judgments on the best interests of the child.
Okay.
Or you can agree to waive spousal support or alimony in a premarital agreement, but that will not hold up. One, if you did not have that agreement 7 days at least before the marriage, so you had time to consider it and consult. Or secondly, if the circumstances of your old life say you've been horribly maimed and disabled and you cannot work, the court might overthrow the agreement for no spousal support in that case.
I see. It's funny. I joked with you before we hit click to record this.
Yes.
That I anticipated talking to you was going to be a lot like talking to someone who teaches you how to buy and sell cars and gives you all the tricks of the trade that you never even knew existed. Like that you can actually buy a car that's sitting on one dealership through another dealership, and you can actually trade in your car to a different dealership than the one you're buying it from. And people don't even know that. And once you know that and how it all works, you'll always get a better deal for a car. And I feel like you've given us the same conversation relative to marriage and divorce. And I greatly appreciate it because I think you've told us so many things guys never even knew we were allowed to ask about or ask for. And it turns out so much of it is always available. Now, obviously, Judith, you have 7 children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're all about families and you're all about marriages staying together. So you're not someone who's out there being a divorce monger, obviously. The name of your book is The Marriage License Handbook, Rules of the Road for Getting Married. And I noticed that the word divorce doesn't even present itself in that title. You're talking about helping people get married on the right track before saying I do. So that's always been your attitude, right?
I noticed in all my 43 years of doing divorces that a lot of times people had not understood what they were getting into in the first place.
Gee, you think?
I mean,
a lot of women just want the marriage. They just want the wedding. They just want a big, pretty wedding, and their biological clock is ticking, and they need some guy to pop a baby into her.
Oh, no, in my case, it was my mother that wanted it.
Oh, yeah, the family pressure. It gets to be crazy, especially in certain cultures. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's crazy. Well, the name of her book is indeed The Marriage License Handbook, Rules of the Road for Getting Married. And, of course, her name is Judith Kalusny. And you can find that book when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon very quickly and easily, because if you're listening to this particular show within a few days of its release, I put that book right at the top of my Amazon influencer queue. Also, when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Judith, Judith, you will be teleported to Judith Kaluzny's wonderful website. And what will they find when they get there, Judith?
There's two websites, judithkaluzny.com, where I have many articles I wrote about mediation and ending a marriage with reasonableness.
And dignity.
And dignity, yes. I do have a second website, which is the safeandsanedivorceproject.com. And that's about my thinking on doing divorces in a whole different way.
So what I'll do is I'll point mountaintoppodcast.com/Judith to the aforementioned judithkaluzny.com. And also, gentlemen, in the show notes, I will link you to safeandsanedivorceproject.com so you can find out Judith's thoughts on that. Judith Kaluzny, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a wonderful episode.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yes.
Thanks.
And yeah, it is. It's wonderful information every guy needs to know. I mean, certainly before you get married. And I know a lot of these guys who are already married are going to be glad to have this information in their back pocket. So yes, thank you so much. Gentlemen, please go to mountaintoppodcast.com. Visit our 3 longtime sponsors, Jocko Willink's Company, Origin in Maine. Also, Hero Soap Company, who has now shampoo and conditioner for you guys, made of the same wonderful organic stuff that won't, feminize your circuits or cause you to become some sort of soy boy and make you smell like a man finally, instead of making you smell like whatever Ivory and Irish Spring make you smell like, which smells more like chemicals than manhood to me, but whatever. So visit Hero Soap. Also visit the guys at the Keyport, all when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com. Listen, gentlemen, some of you have not gotten on my calendar and talked to me for about a half an hour about what's going on in your life with women. I want to hear what's going on with you. Tell me what's on your mind. If we can give you some results in advance and give you something to emerge from that conversation with that's going to help your life immediately, that would be my goal. And if it makes sense to put together a plan of action to get you better with women and help you be the greatest guy you've ever been and can possibly be through coaching, we'll do that too. All of that is there for you and more at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.